My fiancé dumped me just a few months before the wedding, all because his mom dropped one fatal line. Sounds ridiculous, right? I once thought my life would be filled with flowers, wedding rings, and champagne, but instead, I got slapped in the face by my so-called future mother-in-law. And hold on, that shock was just the warm-up. So how did I handle it? Buckle up, because this drama is juicier than any reality TV show you've ever binged. If you had met me about a year ago, you would have seen a girl sitting in a bridal shop in Soho, clutching a white lace gown with eyes sparkling like she'd just hit the jackpot. I remember thinking, this is it. My fairy tale moment. Cole had proposed to me on the rooftop of a boutique hotel in Brooklyn, with the city lights glittering below us like New York itself was celebrating. Honestly, I was never the type to dream of a fairy tale wedding. But when that moment came, I truly believed I'd found my happy ending. Cole was the kind of man who could walk into a room and instantly draw attention. Not because he looked like a runway model, but because of that confident vibe, the kind that says I know exactly where I'm going in life. He worked in finance, the kind of job that kept him buried in spreadsheets and numbers, but also fueled his need for control, for planning every step. Me? Total opposite. I was a copywriter with my head constantly in the clouds, cranking out 100 ridiculous taglines for products no one would ever remember. We were like Excel and Google Docs, different systems, but surprisingly compatible when paired together. But life doesn't just star two main characters. There's always a boss level. And in my case, that boss was Margot, Cole's mom. Margot was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and instantly make everyone feel like they'd dressed wrong. She had a power that didn't need shouting. Just a slight curl of her lips was enough. She owned a high-end fashion boutique on the Upper East Side and mingled with people I'd only ever seen in magazines. From the very first time she met me, I knew she didn't think I belonged in her world. I still remember our first dinner together. I casually mentioned that my parents were high school teachers in New Jersey, both more into gardening than parties. Margot smiled, but her eyes were sharp as razors. I'm pretty sure she was thinking, this girl has no legacy. After dinner, Cole laughed it off, threw his arm around me, and said his mom was just a little traditional. And me, naive as I was, I believed him. But once wedding planning began, I realized I wasn't just marrying Cole, I was marrying Margot too. At first, she seemed helpful, introducing me to planners, calling up a few vendors from her connections. And I, in my innocence, thought, oh wow, this is easy, my very own New York-style fairy godmother. Except, in fairy tales, a fairy godmother waves her wand and turns pumpkins into carriages. Mine? She turned my wedding into a casting call for Gossip Girl. For example, I fell in love with this cozy little Italian restaurant in the West Village with a patio strung with glowing yellow lights. Margot frowned. Sounds like a high school graduation party. I picked out simple invitations with pastel florals. She flipped them back and forth. This font looks cheap, don't you think? And the wedding dress I adored, a soft, flowy A-line. Her comment? Sweet, but not exactly unforgettable. Instead of standing by me, Cole would just sigh and say, babe, just let mom handle it. She's better at this stuff. And you know what? I once saw a whole thread on Reddit called Future Memail Hijacking Wedding. I laughed when I read it, thinking it was just online drama. Little did I know, I'd end up being the main character in that exact story. The breaking point came at what Margot called a family dinner at her penthouse. I thought it was going to be this warm, intimate evening. But the moment I walked in, I realized it wasn't just family. 2 extra women were there, both dressed to kill, dripping with designer everything. They turned out to be Margot's close friends. The kind of rich aunties who always snag front row seats at Fashion Week. Dinner felt more like a visa interview than a family meal. Where did you vacation last summer? One of them asked. I smiled and said I usually go hiking in Colorado with my family, or sometimes we just drive down to visit my grandma. The whole table went silent. One of Margot's friends squinted and said, oh, rustic. Rustic? As if I had just confessed to living in a tent in the woods. I started feeling less like a bride-to-be and more like a job applicant under review. After dinner, Margot pulled me into the kitchen. She gave me a soft smile, but her words cut like a knife. Harper, do you know Amanda? She dated Cole back in business school. Her family owns a vacation home in Martha's Vineyard. They host the most beautiful parties. That's the world Cole belongs to. You're sweet, but will you lift him up or drag him down? I was frozen. For a split second, a scene from some movie flashed through my mind. The one where the main character realizes she's the wrong choice in the eyes of a wealthy family. Only in movies, there's usually a happy ending where someone stands up and defends the love story. Me? I just stood there, hands shaking, feeling like my heart had been shredded into pieces. I walked out of the kitchen and saw Cole chatting and laughing with his mom's friends. I wanted to scream, "Do you even know what your mother just said to me?" But my throat locked up. That night, I sat in the back of a taxi, watching the city blur past the window. New York was still dazzling, still alive, but inside me, my fairy tale had just collapsed. The thing is, after that dinner, I was convinced Cole would defend me, at the very least, say something like, "Don't worry about it, my mom was out of line." But no, the next morning he just poured himself a cup of coffee and tossed out a line that sounded straight out of a press release. "My mom, she just worries too much." Then he shifted the conversation to some deadline at work, leaving me sitting there with a storm of anger I hadn't even had the chance to unleash. From that point on, Cole became a different version of himself. Fewer texts, fewer calls, coming home later. At dinner, instead of asking what I felt like eating, he'd ask things like, "Do you think you'd be comfortable attending events with my colleagues?" Or, "If we have kids someday, do you think the differences between our families would be too much?" Questions that sounded more like an HR interview, and they were coming from my own fiancé. I honestly didn't know whether to answer with my resume or with my heart. One night, Margot invited me over to her apartment alone. Foolishly, I thought, oh, maybe she wants to apologize, maybe she's ready to make peace. I even brought a cheesecake from her favorite bakery as a gesture of goodwill. Big mistake. She greeted me with a smile that looked like it came straight from a fresh round of Botox. After a few pleasantries, she set her wine glass down, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Without Cole, you are nothing." My heart dropped to my shoes. I forced a laugh and asked, "What do you mean by that?" She went on, voice soft as a whisper, but each word slamming into me like a punch. "Cole has a career, a future, a presence. And you? Copywriting? Do you really think you're enough to walk beside him?" I once read a story on Reddit where a mother-in-law flat out told her future daughter-in-law, "You're just a temporary project." Back then I laughed, thinking the writer was exaggerating. Now, I was living the live-action version, and trust me, there was nothing funny about it. I walked out of that apartment with the cheesecake still untouched in its box, wishing I could have just hurled it against those cold stone walls. When I told Cole what happened, I expected, at the very least, for him to get angry. Instead, he sighed and said, "Maybe you misunderstood her. She's just looking out for our future." Honestly, I wanted to drag him into a crash course on Emotional Response 101. Step 1. Take your partner's side. Step 2. Don't defend your mom when she calls your fiancé worthless. I was done being patient. One night when Cole got home, I stood right at the door, my heart pounding like a drum. "You have to choose. It's either me or your mom. If she doesn't stop, this wedding ends right here." Cole went silent. He tossed his blazer onto the chair, loosened his tie, and said quietly, "Maybe my mom's right. Maybe we do come from two different worlds. Maybe we rushed into this." I remember laughing, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from joy. It was the hollow sound that slips out when your heart's already shattered. I slipped the ring off my finger, set it on the table, and it felt like I was throwing back a factory-defective dream. 2 months before the wedding, I dragged my suitcase out of the apartment we used to call home. I had no plan beyond finding a temporary place to crash. New York was still glowing with neon lights, but to me, every street was painted in ash gray. You know that feeling of getting lost in an IKEA maze? Standing between rows of Billy bookcases and Ektorp sofas, completely clueless about where the exit is? That was exactly how I felt walking out of Cole's life. I had no idea which way was out. And I'm guessing by now you're asking, "Harper, why didn't you dump him a long time ago?" Trust me, I'm still asking myself the same question. After hauling my suitcase out of the apartment with Cole, I crash-landed on my best friend Sierra's couch, like a piece of trash blown in by the wind. From that day on, her living room turned into a knockoff season of The Bachelor. Only without roses, without romantic background music. Just me sprawled out like a dried-up fish, eating cereal straight from the box with my hands. Sierra looked at me and said, "Girl, if there were cameras rolling, you'd be eliminated in episode 1. The first few weeks drifted by like one long gray cloud. I forgot to eat, forgot to sleep, Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, thinking, I just escaped a wedding, but somehow I'm stuck in a tragic sitcom starring me. Sierra, being the top-tier producer that she is, tried her best to push me out of the victim role. She plastered sticky notes all over the apartment. Eat, drink water, breathe. It was like I was some malfunctioning robot that needed a full reboot. Then one morning, I got an email from the creative director at work. Harper, we'd like to promote you. Manager of the copywriting team. Interested? I reread it 3 times just to make sure it wasn't some sleep deprivation hallucination. A promotion? Me? The same person who for the past few weeks couldn't even tell the difference between a clean shirt and one stained with tears? Turns out, while I was drowning in relationship drama, at work I was quietly shining, taking on extra tasks, finishing them flawlessly and, well, having zero personal life to distract me. The day I officially accepted the role, Sierra popped open a bottle of wine and screamed, from dumped fiancé to boss babe. I doubled over laughing, wishing I had a meme poster to hang on the wall. Lose a man, gain a team. Romance, I had my heart on lockdown, not about to run another social experiment. At least not until Sierra dragged me to some random networking event where I literally bumped into Caleb. Caleb, a freelance journalist. The kind of guy who could wear a slightly wrinkled button-down and still look artsy, with hair just messy enough to seem intentional and eyes that smiled like he always had a joke ready. We started talking only because we both trashed the awful buffet food. I couldn't tell if I laughed so much because he was genuinely funny or because I couldn't remember the last time I'd laughed at all. Caleb didn't ask about my family background. He didn't care whether my dress was expensive enough. He just told bizarre stories from his assignments. The time he got locked out of his hotel room because he fell asleep in the hallway, or when he interviewed a politician but accidentally left the mic on karaoke mode. And I thought, wow. Finally, someone who treats the drama of my life like a funny story, not a financial report. Speaking of finance, that's exactly when the twist smacked me in the face. A coworker invited me to lunch and whispered, "Have you heard? Cole's out of the company." I put on just the right amount of surprise, but inside I was buzzing like a phone stuck on vibrate. I already knew he'd lost his job, but the reason? That was the real shocker. Not just a failed project, but because he got caught fudging numbers. Not the kind of scandal that makes national headlines, but big enough to get the whole New York finance scene whispering. I swear I even heard someone murmur the word fraud. That same night, Sierra pulled out her laptop and showed me a forum dedicated to dissecting finance scandals. And sure enough, there was Cole's name front and center. The top comment read, "Classic rich boy mistake. Thought numbers bend like mommy's rules." I laughed so hard I choked on my water, wishing Reddit had a special category called Ex-Fiancé Roast. Sitting there between Sierra and the glow of that laptop screen, I realized something. Margot once told me I wasn't enough to lift Cole up. And yet, look who was free-falling now. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept straight through till morning. No sticky notes required. When the news broke that Cole had been booted for scandal, I figured Margot's household would go silent and deal with it privately. But exactly 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. Familiar voice. Margot. At first, I thought maybe she'd call to apologize, or at least smooth things over. Nope. Her opening line was, "Harper, you're talented at writing, at spinning stories. Could you help Cole fix his image, at least within the finance community?" I just sat there, stunned. Excuse me? The same woman who once told me I wasn't enough now wanted to treat me like her emergency PR department? All I could do was let out a dry laugh. Oh, so I went from being the defective version to the patch update? Margot didn't show an ounce of shame. Instead, she softened her tone. "You know Cole is very capable. He just needs someone to guide him. You're a copywriter. You can handle this easily." I shrugged and shot back. "You've got the wrong idea. I write slogans for toothpaste, not scripts for saving the spoiled rich boy." I hung up, thinking that was the end of it. But Margot was never the type to give up. A week later, on a rainy morning, I was at the office when reception messaged me, "There's a very elegant lady here asking to see you." Before I could even guess, Margot swept in. Cream trench coat, designer bag radiating power. She smiled like an actress stepping off a Broadway stage and walked straight toward my desk. "Harper, darling," she purred, then turned to my coworker and spoke loudly enough for the whole office to hear. "Harper still cares deeply for Cole. She's just upset for the moment. I know there's still love between them." I froze. The entire office went silent for a few seconds, then the whispers began. Margot hadn't just ripped open an old wound. She'd staged a full-on reality show right in my workplace. I took a deep breath, stood up and said, "Sorry, but you've got the wrong script. The only feeling I still have for Cole is relief that I got out." Margot tried to smile, but it wavered. She turned to my coworkers as if searching for backup. "You see, Harper and Cole are meant to be. This is just a misunderstanding." Before she could finish, Caleb, who had swung by the office to take me to lunch, walked in. With a relaxed grin, he said, "Oh wow, Harper, I didn't realize I was walking into a live talk show today." The whole office burst out laughing. One of my coworkers chimed in, "Harper's moved on, Margot. You should respect her boundaries." The energy in the room flipped instantly. I felt like I'd just been granted immunity on Survivor by unanimous vote. Margot, meanwhile, stood frozen, her face shifting from cream to a furious red. Finally, she muttered, "I only want what's best for Cole." Then she turned on her heels and stormed out, her heels pounding against the floor like a drum roll of defeat. As the elevator doors closed behind her, the office erupted in chatter. One of the designers teased, "Harper, PR queen, you escaped the drama and crushed the public showdown." I laughed and shrugged. I just played my part, used to be the unwilling fiancé, now I'm the girl with an office full of allies. Caleb leaned close and whispered, "I think you just cost Netflix a killer script." I laughed, but inside, I felt lighter. For the first time, I wasn't the girl pinned under Margot's spotlight. I was the one holding the mic. That night, I had just finished folding clothes for a short trip with Caleb when there was a frantic knock at the door. I opened it and nearly stumbled back. There was Cole. His shirt wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, breath reeking of alcohol. He swayed against the doorframe and mumbled, "Harper, I was wrong. I listened to my mom, and now I've lost everything." If this were a movie, the audience would probably expect me to burst into tears, run into his arms, cue the piano soundtrack. But no, I just stood there, calm as if I'd received a pizza delivery at the wrong address. Strangely enough, in what should have been the most heartbreaking moment, I felt relief. Relief that I'd escaped in time, before sinking with the Titanic known as the Margot Cruise family. Cole kept rambling, telling me how he'd lost his job, his friends had distanced themselves, and his mom spent every day blaming him and crying. Listening to him felt like hearing the recap of a TV series I'd already quit watching. When he reached out to touch me, I stepped back and shook my head gently. "Cole, you didn't lose me because of your mom. You lost me because you didn't have the courage to protect us." He went silent. Then, like a side character realizing his role was over, he turned and stumbled down the hallway. The door shut behind him, and my whole apartment seemed to glow, as if a dark cloud had finally lifted. A few days later, I received an envelope. The handwriting was unmistakable. Margot. I opened it and read every line. For the first time ever, she admitted she was wrong. Wrong for belittling me, wrong for controlling Cole, wrong for believing status could replace character. I stopped when I reached the line, "Harper, once I thought you weren't enough for our family, but now, it's me who dragged my son into the abyss." I laughed softly as I folded the letter, not out of spite, but because she had finally seen the truth I'd known all along. I didn't write a reply letter, just sent a short message. "You once told me I wasn't enough. Now you see, it was you who dragged your son down." Hitting send felt like closing the final chapter of an old book. The next day, Caleb drove me out to a small seaside town a few hours from the city. On the way, I leaned my head against the window, the wind sweeping through my hair, and thought, if I had married Cole, I'd probably be living with the most toxic mother-in-law in Manhattan right now. Honestly, thank God life canceled that wedding for me. I joked about it to Caleb, and he burst out laughing. That's probably the only wedding in history where the cancellation was worth popping champagne for. We rented a little house by the beach and spent a few days just walking, eating seafood, and laughing about the dumbest things. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't carrying a weight on my shoulders anymore. No fear that a late-night phone call would ruin my peace. Sitting on the sand, watching the sunset paint the horizon red, I felt grateful to myself for having the courage to let go, to choose my own peace instead of patching up a dream that was already broken. And now I want to ask you listening to this story. If it were you, when your partner's mom interferes too much, would you walk away early like I did, or stay and fight it out to the end? Comment and let me know. I really do want to hear your experiences. Thanks for sticking with me till the end of this story. See you next time.